Fair warning, this show contains strong language and adult themes from time to time. Sorry, Jerry can't help it.
Sick Boy Wolfgang Productions presents The Offering with Jerry Horror. A deep dive into the history of film and its filmmakers. Mostly horror, always genre.
80s and 90s horror fans, it is time to rejoice. You've seen his work, you're a fan of his art, and now you can wear artist Mark Schoenbach's Sadist Art Designs. If you're a fan of cult classic horror, you know his work. You've seen it everywhere, from the Halloween franchise to Pool Party Massacre. Whether it's at Slashback Video or Mac and Me, you will recognize his distinct style instantly. Now check out his latest stock, including R.L. Stine and Christopher Pike inspired merchandise. Visit sadistartdesigns.com and put some respect on your swag. If you're anything like me, you're always on the lookout for cool, new, original gift items that you could give to your horror and genre-obsessed loved ones, or even something you could get to treat yourself. I found the perfect thing for you. Geek Emporium has custom hand-etched glass art that's the perfect gift. Believe me, when you see these glass mugs, glass jars, and original prints, you're going to want all of them for your own collection. Geek Emporium covers every genre you can imagine. Marvel, Star Wars, 80s and 90s horror. I'm looking through the website right now, geekemporium.nyc, and I can see featured they got some gorgeous stuff from Labyrinth with Jennifer Connelly, A Nightmare Before Christmas. I see Brandon Lee's The Crow. They cover the whole genre gamut. It's incredible. I met up with these guys at Eternal Con on Long Island. I got my hands on a sweet Texas Chainsaw Massacre Leatherface glass mug and a Freddy Krueger wooden coffin. All custom. And these are hand-drawn. They were drawing it right in front of me. So what are you waiting for? You can always check out their Etsy shop or head over to geekemporium.nyc right now and scroll through the goods. Trust me, your geek-loving loved one will thank you later. Listeners and fans of The Offering can get their hands on their very own The Offering with Jerry Horror merch, now only at TeePublic. Find your own fresh The Offering with Jerry Horror high-quality merchandise, including t-shirts, hoodies, tank tops, long sleeves, stickers, and mugs. Just like the show, we've got gear that's mostly horror, always genre. The Offering with Jerry Horror TeePublic store has everything you need to represent your favorite podcast. Folks, head on over to teepublic.com right now and pick up your very own Offering tee today. Welcome to The Offering with Jerry Horror, the show where we can have a quiet and frank discussion as adults about the things that matter to me, or at least that I think matter to me. Please take a moment to subscribe to our show wherever you get fine podcasts, and hey, stay up to date on future episodes. Coming up, a Gen X icon who couldn't resist the lure of controlling a new and very expensive franchise. A studio looking to the past to build an entirely new world and reinvent classic characters. Budgets grew, and so did egos. The production itself was an absolute bloated disaster. Some executives thought this movie would be unreleasable. This is the story of the birth and death of the Dark Universe. Stay tuned, you're not going to want to miss this. Ladies and gentlemen, friends beyond the binary, this is The Offering. I'm your host, Jerry Horror. I hope that this podcast finds you well, unlike that email I sent you where I told you that I had gotten your sister pregnant. That happened. I'm sorry. It is what it is. Your sister's a beautiful woman, and we're in love. And you needed to hear it from me first. So, right now, we're recording this in the middle of the summer. And to be perfectly honest with you, it is terrifying that the Screen Actors Guild, Writers Guild, are still on strike. It's absolutely terrible. It's gotten to the point that some of these studios, which will remain unnamed, because eventually, hopefully, someone will want to give me a job or something. But the studios have actually trimmed the trees where the protesters are so they can not have shade to protest in. It's all become really petty. Hopefully, we're able to establish some talks. As of recording this, everybody's trying to come to the table and make this go away. But there's a larger problem here. And this is where it affects the viewers. This is where it affects the companies, the studios who actually run all of this. They're not going to have content next year. We had this whole terrible problem with coronavirus and whatnot. And can I just say this really quick? The new Mission Impossible movie, Dead Reckoning, there's a lot of stuff in that movie you could tell it was shot during COVID. Because they waited to release it just like they did with Top Gun. They wanted to go theatrical. You watch that movie, and if you look at eye lines, you look at the way it's shot, you can tell, like, the close-ups, that none of these people were in the same room. They just found, like, workarounds. So we're still getting post-COVID movies that had to adhere to all these rules and regulations, and unfortunately, it affects the end product. So we just got through that, debatably, because COVID is still surging as I'm recording this. Now, the new thing is not the COVID protocols. This time, it's this strike. And it's creating a very toxic environment for creators and creatives. People want to be paid. They do not want to be replaced by machines. Yeah, it's a really scary time. Obviously, the offering stands with the WGA and the SAG. It's one of these things where these people need to be paid. They need to get residuals for streaming, because it's not just about the AI stuff. A lot of this is, hey, look, throughout the pandemic and the last 3 years, you guys, the corporations, the studios, made out like bastards, bandits, record profits. And they didn't cut anybody into that action. And here's the deal, man. Residuals, depending on what you negotiate, can be something or nothing. But hey, look, you made your contribution. You deserve to make as much money as they do. You deserve your piece of the pie. And that's with anything. It's not just movies, it's in life. You have a distinct talent that you brought to the table. It was showcased, and now it's in something that's become incredibly profitable, and it's what we call fucking profit sharing. And that's what this is all about. It's about these studios. They've lined their pockets long enough, and now it's time for them to pony up. But we're going to be in deep shit. Because there's been such a delay now with the writer's strike, people can't even do press to promote what's coming out. They're moving films all over the schedule because they don't have some of these movies, they need the actors to promote them. It just doesn't work. You don't have late night shows. There's no way for these people to promote these projects. We're going to be in a drought. There is going to be a huge drought of content because of this strike. I'm hoping that by the time you're listening to this, that the strike has ended, a negotiation has been reached, and that artists and creatives everywhere can get what is so duly owed to them for their contributions to these billion-dollar empires. So that's what I say. I say eat the rich? Screw eating. Let's just burn them alive. I mean, look, right now, I'm from Long Island. Over by me, 30 minutes away, is David Zaslav's $300 million compound in the Hamptons. You think he gives a fuck about me? You think he gives a fuck about you? I mean, unless you're his daughter and you're listening to this. And I mean, if you look half decent, definitely holler at me. My DMs are open. So, with that being said, ain't nothing changing except the rent. Rent stayed pretty much the same. And even that's going up. Jesus. Hey, we've got a really fantastic show today. People have been asking me for years in my personal life to chime in about this situation, about this project, about this universe. And now we are getting to do the dirty deed. So stay tuned after the break. We're going to get into it, and I hope all is good with you. Much love. One thing that I realized, this is kind of my big thought. You have to nail Iron Man. You got to get Tony Stark right. And once you get that right, then you can start building out your universe. But until you have that central character, central focus and narrative to want to tell a story that explores other characters and other worlds, you need to have a very strong protagonist. And I'm not quite sure what this movie's about, whether it's about Tom Cruise or whether it's about a mummy. But there's an important lesson here. And the lesson is don't count your chickens before the eggs are hatched. So the main question is, the big question, did the Dark Universe come before the Mummy or vice versa? Is it the horse before the carriage? What is the situation? I did a lot of research for this episode, and holy smokes, it's insane. This is the newest movie that we've done for The Offering. This is 2017. The further you get away from a movie, people die, people fall on hard times, people talk shit. And a lot of people don't want to talk shit because it could adversely affect their career. However, this thing was such a humdinger of an incident that people are already talking shit. They were talking shit a week before the movie came out.
You have no idea what you have unleashed.
What the hell?
How did you get out of that plane? There's not a single scratch on your body.
You are alive because you were cursed.
Cursed? By what?
The ultimate evil. Welcome to a new world of gods and monsters.
You saw that, right?
She did something to me.
The very essence of evil calls to you now.
Get her, Nick! Kick her ass! I'm scared.
It takes a monster to defeat a monster.
Oh, that's my face! That's my face! Run!
Believe it or not, originally in 1999, the Stephen Sommers film The Mummy, that one with Brendan Fraser, Tom Cruise was offered that part. He turned it down to do Vanilla Sky, and he thought that The Mummy was silly. His words. He thought the script was silly. It didn't work for him. And it's great because, hey, it worked out. I think we made the right decision with Brendan Fraser. I think those movies are... They're certified classics. Like the first Mummy, easily, right? Like, it's the law of diminishing returns. By the time you get to that third movie with the Yetis and Jet Li and what the hell are we doing? I was on vacation with my family and we watched that. I think we were like in Disney World or something. We had this big villa. And we were watching it and it was just nobody could pay any attention. Like we actively avoided, even though everybody was sick of everybody on vacation, we did everything we could not to talk about the tomb of the Emperor's dragon. Oh, what a... Dude, I don't even... Oh, okay. Every 5 to 10 years, Universal gets a wild hair up their ass and they try to adapt or make the Universal monsters into some kind of new mythology. Whether it's toys, whether it's video games, they do a bunch of different stuff. And it becomes like kind of like that toy box thing when you're playing with your friends. It's like, what do we got? Okay, we got He-Man, we got Brave Star, we got Lion-O. What toys do we have to play with? And of course, what made money? What's a big obligation to our theme parks and to our fans? People love Universal monsters. So much as I'm doing this show, we're getting a whole theme park land. We're getting it might be called the Dark Universe. We don't know what the name of it is, but it's going to be an entire land at Epic Universe in Orlando, Universal Studios. Going to have a dark ride with the monsters. Going to have some really neat stuff. I'm excited. I'm trying to contain my excitement. So yeah, Universal is always trying to reinvent these characters. They're always trying to do something new with the monsters. Stephen Sommers, he did the Brendan Fraser Mummy movies, and then His big plan, this is because we are constantly doing this, he does Van Helsing. And Van Helsing was to be the connective tissue to the Mummy, and that was going to be another dark universe of its own kind. We probably will do Van Helsing. Van Helsing was almost an episode this year. We're definitely going to do it because that movie is bonkers with a capital B. Holy shit. But yeah, if we're going to really go back, I'm going to say that Van Helsing movie was the first real attempt at a universe. A lot would happen between now and then. May 21st of 2017, Universal Studios officially called their new monster universe the Dark Universe. This was also hinted in the third trailer for The Mummy. When they were doing the Emperor Tomb of the Dragon, they were trying actively to do a dark universe then. The first trailer for The Mummy was whatever. There was a teaser. Then there was a regular trailer. And then when they hit the third trailer for the movie, they slapped that dark universe thing on it. And people were kind of like, wait, what? Because we have to document this. On May 22nd, 2017, the official Dark Universe Twitter account. This is crazy. Just there was an official. Twitter's not even Twitter. Twitter is now X. Maybe they changed it back by the time you're hearing this. So they have a Dark Universe Twitter account, and they posted an image with Tom Cruise, Sofia Boutella, Johnny Depp, Javier Bardem, and Russell Crowe all standing together. It was totally them, not shot in the same room. They just digitally added them in. And the picture was revealed to be edited later, obviously. None of the actual Dark Universe was in the same room. That's kind of weird. Whatever. It's just, hey, it's a publicity photo. I remember sitting in the theater June 9th when I saw this film, because I saw this when it came out because I'm a nerd. I mean, it's a Mummy movie. It's a Universal Monsters movie to me. So I'm there. They've got my money. I'm like a dumb little kid when it comes to the Universal Monsters. It came on, and that logo appeared. And the whole world, the Universal logo goes dark, and then the Dark Universe title appears. And I'm like, I even know at this moment, I'm like, fuck, they're totally committing to this. You know, we talk about, Mean Girls are trying to make Fetch, stop trying to make Fetch happen. And they were trying to make the Dark Universe happen. Okay, I get it. This is a Dark Universe movie, but what is the Dark Universe? The MCU gradually happened. It kind of, I want to say to a degree, it kind of organically happened. They developed it as they went along. This was not the case. They're committing to this from Jump Street. The Mummy hasn't even come out yet, and we're teasing all these other movies. Johnny Depp's going to be the Invisible Man. What are we doing? Let me meet the Mummy. Let me meet this half-ass character that Tom Cruise is playing. That was another point of contention was, well, okay, we've seen the Brendan Fraser Mummy. What is this? Is Tom Cruise going to be the Mummy? We weren't quite sure because it was very vague. The tagline from this film is, "Welcome to a new world of gods and monsters." That's from The Bride of Frankenstein, which also produced by Universal Studios in 1935. And that would have been the next installment. Bride of Frankenstein would have been the direct follow-up to The Mummy, which is kind of weird. I don't know. There was also this wild rumor, too, at the time, that the one person they didn't get for the photo shoot was Dwayne Johnson. Dwayne Johnson was going to be the Wolfman. That was their big coup. Basically, from what I understand and what I've read, a screenplay for the Dwayne Johnson Wolfman movie exists. It was down the line. That was not the immediate, okay, that's not what we're going to adapt. We're going to do Bride and some other stuff. Bill Condon, director of Dreamgirls, amazing stuff. Basically, at a certain point, they're like, this was right as this movie came out. They're like, listen, we're gonna press the pause button on this Bride of Frankenstein movie. We acknowledge that we're gonna need more time to build the Dark Universe. For a long time, Universal maintained, for many years after, this thing is still in development. Let's get into it a little bit here. The actual Mummy. The original plot for this film followed a Navy SEAL and his team that were battling mummies led by this ancient Egyptian deity. From what I understand with this screenplay, it was basically aliens, but with mummies. And it was a hard R, heavy action piece. People love this script. This script went around for a while, and Universal, it was another one of those things. Can you develop us something different? So it started out as this very dark action movie. The other thing too is nobody wanted to work with Cruise, because when you work with Tom Cruise, there's a lot of other things that come into play. Cruise is not a guy at this point in his career who you just hire. He comes to set for a day or two. He is so controlling, and he's a maverick. He's whatever you want to call him, but a lot of people think he's a pain in the ass to work with because he has to control it. It's just like these new Mission Impossible movies. He's controlling every aspect of that production. He's one of the producers. It's his money, so it's his way or the highway. And that's been a problem. That's been a problem with him and Paramount for these MI movies. They can't control him. And there's something kind of exciting about that. There's something refreshing that there's still an actor out there who's taking chances, doing these big things. He's doing it his way. And you got to appreciate that, because at the end of the day, that's what we want. We all want autonomy. So Len Wiseman, if you remember from Die Hard 4.0, the one with Justin Long, he was originally set to direct. He dropped out before production began. Wiseman was then replaced by Andy Muschietti, who just recently directed The Flash and the It movies. I like the It movies. I thought they were good. And then Muschietti dropped out because of creative differences. They told Muschietti that they were going to try to do this Dark Universe thing, and he's like, no. He's like, dude, we need to make a good movie. And then, so that didn't work. This film they eventually go with Alex Kurtzman, okay? This was his second directorial film after People Like Us in 2012. When he was first hired, a lot of fans and insiders wonder why producers would bring in somebody with so little experience in directing and also with no experience making huge budget action films. Kurtzman is basically J.J. Abrams' boy. Even to this day, he's very involved. He comes in when the Star Trek reboots by JJ come in, and now he's just carved out that niche, and he's basically been running Star Trek for what seems like the last decade. It's insane. And he's a controversial figure. I think anytime you deal with something that's as beloved as the Star Trek franchise, it's going to ruffle feathers. Even if you did something amazing, you know how this works. The fans are never happy. The other thought was, let's bring in Kurtzman because he could probably be like Tom Cruise could easily control this guy. Speaking of which, Cruise wanted control. There were so many writers on this movie, numerous rewrites. And I'm not just like, there's that initial film that is the germ of everything that is to come. But that version of the film with the Navy SEALs is just like 95% of it is thrown out the window. So they go back to basics, and then this is based on a story by John Splates, Alex Kurtzman, and Jenny Lumet. Now, that's the story by. Here's the screenplay. David Koepp, Christopher McQuarrie, and Dylan Cussman. Okay, so David Koepp as a screenwriter is no slouch. He's written so much stuff. First off, he wrote Mission Impossible 3. He wrote Jurassic Park. Let's see what else. Carlito's Way, Snake Eyes, not the one with Henry Golding. The Snake Eyes with it's the De Palma one with Nicolas Cage. He wrote Panic Room. He wrote Indiana Jones and the Crystal Skull. Maybe we shouldn't talk about that. That was an episode. Was it? Did it happen? No one knows. So David Koepp, Death Becomes Her. This guy, man, he's got a really, really nice pedigree. If you're bringing in David Koepp, this is not a cheap script to write. We had 3 people on the story by, and now we had 3 more people on the screenplay. So obviously Tom Cruise has worked with Christopher McQuarrie many times. He's making the Mission Impossible movies with him right now. But basically, McQ, as his friends call him, was brought in to be Tom Cruise's enforcer. To basically anything that Tom Cruise needed done that he couldn't do while he was acting, McQ is there to watch his ass and his bottom line. They realized, they're like, wait a second, we have to change the script and we've got to build it out because we have to introduce Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. This was something that was late introduced into the screenplay, but they realized, like, oh shit, if we're going to build this, we need exposition man. And that's basically what Russell Crowe, who plays Dr. Jekyll, is. He's exposition man. He's explaining how this world works. They were like, if we're going to do this, we need a decent star to play him. So before they landed on Russell Crowe, Javier Bardem, Joseph Gordon-Levitt, Tom Hardy, and Eddie Redmayne were all considered to play Dr. Henry Jekyll. Ultimately, Russell Crowe is kind of like the only guy who was available at the time, who was like an actor of note. It works out, well, kind of, sort of, because none of this happens, but Bardem is then cast as Frankenstein's monster in the planned sequel. That was his way of making good on that. Obviously, when you think about it, this was an unenviable task, okay? All of it. All of it. It is what it is. No one thought that any of this would really work. To be perfectly honest with you, on December 20th, 2016, this is where it really goes off the rails. IMAX mistakenly released a trailer with no audio except for Tom Cruise's grunts and screams, inspiring many, many internet memes. If you've never seen that trailer, it is wild stuff. It's just isolated audio with all the sound effects and the music taken out, and it is goofy as F. It's crazy. That was definitely a bad sign of things to come. Essentially, like, Kurtzman he loses complete control over this project, okay? Because he's dealing with Tom Cruise's ego, and it becomes one of these things where every day becomes a wrestling match between him and Kurtzman. And pretty soon on, Kurtzman realizes, I can't deal with this guy. I'm just going to let him do whatever he's going to do. The studio will tell him yes or no, and I'll just carry that out, and that's the way this is going to work. One part of McHugh and Cruise's, the way that they work, and this is what got them in trouble with these most recent Mission Impossible films. This new one came out. It was like almost 2.5 hours. And like somebody was like, yeah, there's like a 3+ hour cut. And I'm like, I believe it, because there's stuff that feels like it was cut from it. But the way that McHugh and Tom Cruise do things is they kind of collaborate, and then it's like jazz. They're kind of just free form, like, oh, this'll work. And as we've learned, that's not a good recipe, because essentially you're burning somebody's money. And that's where it came into the Mission Impossible films, where Tom Cruise was like, all right, I have to do the fuck you money thing. So it's like, well, if I'm burning my own money, then I can't get in trouble from anybody. It's on me. The onus is on me. So obviously the wonderful Jake Johnson, who is kicking ass right now in Minx, is in this film. He's incredibly talented. He's got great comedic timing. And he decides to sign on to be in The Mummy because they needed somebody who could work as a comedic foil. The problem is that Tom Cruise likes to do his own stunts, and if you're there with Tom, Tom's going to pressure you to do your stunts. So it became one of these things where Jake Johnson was not used to working with someone who is so intense like Tom Cruise is. And it became kind of this push and pull every day of, shit, what is Tom Cruise going to make me do today? It almost got to the point where like Johnson was afraid to go to set. He knows Tom's going to push him. And to be perfectly honest with you, Johnson was, and still, he's a comedic actor. He wasn't used to all these stunts. So he got in great shape. He lost weight. It was one of those deals where Jake Johnson had to do a scene where he was going to get hit with an explosion. It's early on in the movie where the whole concrete pillar comes apart. Tom was like, nah, you can do it yourself. You can do it yourself. You'll be fine, Jake. And he's like, I don't know, man. He's like, I think the stunt performer should do this. He ends up doing the stunt, and if you watch it there, he gets knocked down. He falls, and he goes flying because of the explosion or whatever, the grenade that goes off. He got a concussion, and he really got hurt. He got to the triage, the hospital, and they're like, well, what happened? He's like, Tom Cruise pushed me. He pushed me too far. And that's another thing that doesn't really work with this movie. For instance, there's this whole thing where, spoiler if you're listening to this, Jake Johnson gets killed, and we start plundering other attempts. Like there's this whole thing where he's like, he's dead and he's coming back as a ghost and speaking to the Tom Cruise, character. I forget what it was. He has a name. I don't even care. It's so ridiculous and tenuous. No one gives a shit. He's Tom Cruise. He's Action Man. It was like somebody said to me the other day, what are these Mission Impossible movies are about? I'm like, Tom Cruise is Action Man. Action Man runs. Things explode. He's Action Man. That's it. In An American Werewolf in London, the seminal John Landis film, there is the character who gets attacked by the werewolf, and he comes back, he presents himself as a ghost, he's trying to warn our main character. So they took that little spin, and that's a little borrowed piece of the equation. And let's not forget, American Werewolf in London was like 82. That's another one. 81? I don't know. Who cares? Go look it up. You've got probably a phone or something in your hands. Make that happen. It's one of these things where an American Werewolf in London, like, they weren't as quite aware of it, but I think they realized, like, oh, wait, we should probably do something with these monsters, put a little bit of a spin on them. So again, this whole thing with Universal trying to reinvent the monsters, it's cyclical. Like I said, go look. Every like 5 to 10 years, there's like a massive reinvention to basically try and make this thing happen, try to make fetch happen, to try to make the monsters happen. This movie is incredibly bloated. We're going to go through numbers quite shortly. Tom Cruise just did whatever the hell he wanted. They were making stuff up on the fly. They're inserting new stunts, new gimmicks. And it's like, Jesus, what are you doing, Tom? At the end of the day, it became a battle with Universal that they were just like, we're done. We're done arguing with Tom Cruise. Everybody's stress, our mental well-being is better. Again, he used McHugh as his enforcer and basically got what he wanted. And at this point, Kurtzman is director in name only, okay? Because very much earlier episode Cobra, we talked about Stallone, ego, megalomaniacal, taking over the production. He completely took over the production, and him and McHugh are just telling everybody what to do, and Kurtzman is just kind of standing there like a cuck, not knowing what to do. And I think that kind of scared Kurtzman off from directing. But he's fine. Dude, the guy's sleeping on a pile of money tonight. Don't cry for him. It becomes one of these things that nobody thinks this movie it's going to happen. It got so bad at a certain point that executives within Universal had been watching dailies, and they said, is this film releasable? Because they're shooting so much stuff. They're going over time. They're going over budget. No one knows what they've got. Now, this movie's like 2 hours or whatever, but the original cut of this movie, supposedly they shot closer to like 3.5 hours of footage. And again, that goes back to that whole improvisational style that the both of these guys have. Do you get what I'm saying? They're making it up as they go along, and that's fine. It's especially not fine when it's other people's money. The other problem too with this movie is that Tom Cruise, we're not quite sure how old he is. They make it like this character that he's playing is supposed to be like 20 years old. And it's like, come on. It was even one of these things where the studio was like, hey, maybe we could find you a more age-appropriate co-star. And again, we go back to that whole like Roger Moore thing. It's like, nope. Tom Cruise is a 20-year-old man. He's a youthful man. And I think that's part of why this movie doesn't work. A lot of the reason that it just doesn't really come together is the fact that Tom Cruise is woefully miscast. Theoretically, this should have been a guy like in his mid to late 20s, like like an adventurer, kind of like, Uncharted. They screwed that up. Oof. You see that Tom Holland? Oh man, he's like Mr. Stark, blah 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 blah. Except you just, instead of Mr. Stark, it's Mr. Wahlberg. Mr. Wahlberg, I'm going to be an adventurer. But you know what? I hate to say it, Tom Holland in this movie, better movie. I think it might work even more. I mean, hey, look, it's Tom Cruise. Everybody loves Tom Cruise. But the problem is that Universal and a couple of the screenwriters are trying to basically say, this is a horror movie. And Tom Cruise and McHugh are like, no, this is an action movie. It's an action movie that has horror. So they keep changing things on the fly. They keep changing the story. And at a certain point, Universal says, we have fucking had it with everybody. Everybody can kiss our ass, including you, Mr. Cruise. So Warner Brothers comes in with a mandate of reshoots. And in these reshoots, we've got our stuff with Russell Crowe. It's inserted. So Russell Crowe is, again, he's an exposition man. He's explaining everything. And at that point, it was very obvious that Universal wanted their own MCU. And this is indicative. It's still a problem. It's still, even now with Barbie, Mattel is counting their chickens before the eggs are hatched, and they're saying, "Oh, we're gonna have a Mattel universe." Eventually, we get to this point where Universal has no choice, and they're like, "Okay, eventually this movie has to come out." They bring someone down on set to run interference with Christopher McQuarrie. Because they now they're on to the scam. They're on to the scam that Tom does this and McHugh does this to throw them off. So they send someone down to the set to this person, like, is been given a job. You're to babysit McHugh and distract him. Anytime that him and Tom have a crazy idea about reshooting something or doing this or another stunt, shoot it down, keep him occupied, babysit them. So yeah, obviously Tom and Christopher, they become aware of this, so they start playing their own games, and they hire assistants to run interference against the Universal executives who are there to run interference on what they're doing. So again, you see where the egos come into play, and a lot of this stuff doesn't work. A lot of the really nasty horror elements remain in this movie. Sofia Boutella as the mummy, she's fantastic. She's absolutely a lot of fun. There's some really gnarly and gory effects in this movie. Some of it works, it's creepy. But I think what it was they were trying to do this hybrid. And like Blade's a very good example. Blade is a great hybrid of horror and action. And I do feel that sometimes with this movie, the problem is tonally it's a little bit mixed. Like sometimes it wants to be Mission Impossible, and then other times it wants to be a really sanguine horror film. Real dyed-in-the-wool horror film. The screenplay, the ideology, everybody involved, it's just, I don't know what it is. This is not a terrible film. It's not a good film either. But at the same time, it doesn't know what it wants to be. And tonally, it's a little bit all over the place. Sometimes it's desperately trying to inject some kind of humor, but this is the problem. When you have this many people on a screenplay, and they brought in script doctors, there were all kinds of people that were brought in to smooth it out. But eventually, Tom Cruise's will is too strong. And in the end, Universal just kind of lays down and says, let them finish the movie. Let it be what it's going to be, and we'll figure it out. Because the concept here is that this is just the first movie. And the question which we posed at the beginning of the episode was, did they know all along? And here is what I think. I think there might have been an idea for the Dark Universe. There might have been a concept, okay? Ultimately, what happens is I think they start to realize, wait a second, we can actually make this work. Once they sign on Cruise for this movie, then they knew what they were going to do. Because the deal, the way that they lured Tom Cruise to this movie, because remember, in 1999, he said that movie that Summers did was silly. The reason he was willing to come to bat for this was they were going to use him as their Tony Stark. They were going to build the whole universe out from this Tom Cruise character. The problem with doing that is that you now have to put him in every movie, and Tom Cruise is expensive. And the other question becomes like, is he willing to do cameos? Because there's no way, if you're going to do a connected universe, we've seen how Marvel did it. Even though I'm not a fan of the house style that they've been using for the last 5 years, it's effective and it works. But the real sweetheart part of this whole deal was, in order to lure him in to do the movie, there was something baked into Cruise's contract that would give him a piece of the back end of every subsequent Dark Universe movie. So if you're Cruise, this is a good deal. Look, they can run interference, but you're basically doing whatever you want. And now every time they make a monster movie, I get a piece of it? Come on. I think that was it. I think Cruise probably saw this and said, hey, people like the Universal monsters. They're going to do a bunch of these. I'll pop in or whatever. And these can be like my little side things. And then we can have like our big Avengers style movie with all the monsters. In theory, on paper, it sounds good.
We'll be right back with more of The Offering with Jerry Horror.
It's always Halloween at the Haunted House of Hamburgers, Long Island's only Halloween-themed restaurant. At Haunted House of Hamburgers, they are obsessed with both Halloween and hamburgers, so why not have the best of both worlds every day? Salivate over their delicious hamburgers during Boo Brunch, along with their Witch's Brew and Crypt Keeper cocktails. Or take a stab at the undead desserts, such as I Scream Sundays, with your bobbing for apple pie. My favorites are the Afterlife alcoholic shakes. I'd go for the Pentagram Passion Fruit, or the Exorcism Espresso Martini Shake, or my go-to, the Loch Ness Monster Lobster Rolls. This place is fun as hell. They even encourage you to come dine in, dressed in costume. Your kids will love that. Or that could be one hell of a memorable first date. They're not going to forget that, right? Here's a little insider tip. For a far-out, trippy dining experience, ask your waiter for 3D glasses. It's pretty rad, let me tell you. Located at 330 Fulton Street in Farmingdale, New York, it's the restaurant that looks like a haunted house. You won't miss it, I promise. Make Haunted House of Hamburgers your year-round Halloween destination. Stay spooky all year long at Strangelove Parlor, Long Island's exquisite oddities and curiosity parlor in Lindenhurst, New York. They've got some ghastly apparel. Strangelove Parlor supplies an array of goth jewelry, unisex horror-themed gear, Halloween accoutrement, monstrous purses and wallets, spooky pins, patches, and stickers, providing you with the most wonderful and the most strange of treasures. Visit Strangelove Parlor regularly to find the item of your dreams, or perhaps even your nightmares. Grab your ghoul gang and visit today. Strangelove Parlor in Lindenhurst, Long Island, New York. You're listening to The Offering with Jerry Horror. Got a question or story you want to share with me? It might be featured in a future episode. Email me at jerryhorror@gmail.com or hit me up on Twitter at jerryhorror. I'm also on Instagram. You can find me there at jerryhorror. Rate and review this show on Apple Podcast, and you might find your review in an upcoming episode. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to The Offering. Now back to the show. The budget for this film was between $125 million to $195 million. The numbers change depending on who you ask, and again, this is because this is a film that is so recent, we don't have the kind of data that we have on, say, an older film that's 20, 30 years old. The Mummy is a huge flop, for the most part. For a Tom Cruise movie, for a summer tentpole, big swing blockbuster, it makes $80 million. So, total, when everything is adjusted, globally, the film made $410 million. Due to a combined production and marketing cost, they believe that the real cost of The Mummy was somewhere in the ballpark of $345 million to $400 million. And that sounds about more accurate. Basically, they didn't really even break even. They lost money on this movie, big time. They lost money in so many different ways because they had planned to do a line of toys for this movie. There was a whole bunch of stuff. There was going to be a comic book because that's what this is. When you're launching an entire world, a universe, you need all these other aspects of it. Probably, and it pains me to say it, but the most successful of the movie universes outside of the MCU is probably the Conjuring verse. They've made money. That Nun movie made almost $1 billion. They got a second one coming out. That franchise has made over $1 billion for Warner Brothers. They're talking about doing a TV show with Ed and Lorraine Warren. It's something that worked. Annabelle hit. Everything kind of hit with the Conjuring verse, and it's been successful and it made money. Despite some of the stuff like The Nun is a totally different time period. So we're jumping all throughout all of them. Even like the first Annabelle movie is like in the 1960s, and then eventually it comes forward. You know, they're all over the place time-wise, but it's been successful and it's worked for them. One Universal executive said that the movie needed to gross $500 million to break even. And even if it did that, they said that the net loss would have been $60 to $100 million. For one reason or another, we can't seem to get a straight answer as how much this movie lost, but I can say this. It was a lot. Okay? Because you have conflicting reports, and I think it's one of those things like everybody's trying to save face, and nobody wants to be the head of the studio or in charge of the movie when it loses money. Everybody wants to be there for the Stanley Cup, the championships, the playoffs. Everybody wants to sit there and take the photo nobody wants to be the person that dropped the ball. We didn't win the championship because of this guy. And I think that was another problem with The Mummy, was nobody wanted to take any responsibility for it. Everybody was like pointing their fingers like, no, it was his fault. It was the marketing. Ultimately, it is what it is. So by 2019, Universal announced plans to return to standalone features instead of using a shared narrative, and that was effectively the end of the Dark Universe. Or was it? Also in 2019, they announced that Bride of Frankenstein and the shared universe had been shelved indefinitely. However, they were going to focus on one new movie that might be able to create its own universe, but it would be its own thing. And that's The Invisible Man 2020, which is amazing. Oh my God, I love The Invisible Man. What a fantastic movie. They made it scary. I liked Hollow Man. That's the Paul Verhoeven, Kevin Bacon one. It's The Invisible Man. In this movie, in this incarnation, The Invisible Man is an absolute monster with a capital M. It works for me. I think that's the better way to do it. I think The Invisible Man is a fantastic movie. I think Guillermo del Toro did his best version of Creature from the Black Lagoon with the film The Shape of Water. If you want to reinvent these characters, you have to bring in creatives, storytellers that want to tell new stories and want to tell something that's emotionally moving and gripping that we haven't seen before. And I think that is the secret of reinvention. You have to put a new twist on an old classic. In 2022, director Alex Kurtzman commented that the film is probably the biggest failure of his life, and that there's about 1 million things I regret about it. However, he noted that the job gave him more experience and knowledge as a filmmaker. Brendan Fraser, who had starred in the previous Mummy films, stated that in his view, the film failed due to a lack of fun. And that's what was lacking in this incarnation. It didn't know whether it wanted to be a straight-ahead horror movie or a pure action film. The Mummy should be a thrill ride, but not too terrifying and scary. And trust me, I know how difficult it is to pull off. I tried to do it 3 times. So there was a comic book that was made for this movie, and that was supposed to set up the template for the Dark Universe. It was supposed to drop right after the movie, and basically Universal knew that they would have to go back to the drawing board. So this comic book was also supposed to be like not just extended universe, like it was going to be lore. It was going to be canon. I think that once the reception was what it was to The Mummy, they were like, we can't put anything out there. Like there can't be any lore. There can't be any world building because we're not sure what kind of world we're trying to build. We're not there yet. There were 2 video games based on the Mummy. There was The Mummy Demastered, which is actually very good. It's a Metroidvania game. It's on PS4, Xbox. Featured a standalone story. It deals concurrently with the events of the film, as well as following Prodigium, which was is so ridiculous. Prodigium was the name of this organization under the command of Dr. Jekyll. Come on. It's like basically Russell Crowe was Sam Jackson. He was like Nick Fury in this movie, except it sucked. The Mummy Demastered is good. And then they did a video game called Mummy Dark Universe Stories, which was kind of more like a weird RPG type of thing. It was mostly made for like mobile games, and it's completely delisted and doesn't really exist. It did have a lot of the original story elements in it, so if you can find it, if you can emulate it, and you desperately need to know where the story of Prodigium and the Dark Universe was going, this game that's completely unavailable now holds the keys to all of your questions, and maybe some of the answers. But Demastered is very good. I recommend it if you like Metroidvania games. It's a total side-scroller shooter. It's definitely a good game. Even if you don't like this movie or whatever, and you're just looking for like an old school 16-bit Metroidvania game, you could do a lot worse. Yeah, and it's crazy too, because the other game, the Dark Universe Stories, it basically featured this narrative that was choose your own adventure. So ultimately, like, you could go down all these branching paths and it would reveal what the storyline was going into the next film. It was kind of like almost a prologue. It's ridiculous. The video games came out, and then a manga series, which was set concurrently with the film from Ganma. It was The Mummy Dark Stories, ran from July 15th weekly to July 29th. Again, there's really not a lot of stuff here. Everything that they thought that they were going to do, whether it was the action figures, the merchandise, it never came to fruition. Now, I would like to say this movie is an award winner. Tom Cruise would win his first Golden Raspberry for Worst Actor as Nick Morton in The Mummy. So regardless of that, nobody remembers Nick Morton. Are you telling me that Nick Morton was really going to be the whole center of the dark universe? It has no ring to it, Nick Morton. Originally, the character's name was Tyler Colt, but Tom Cruise thought that sounded too corny. So, I don't know, Tyler Colt, better name. Way better name for like an adventuring action hero. This whole Nick Morton character should have been played more like Indiana Jones, if that makes sense. So it wouldn't be another episode of The Offering if we didn't go forward and talk about an unhinged review. We'll get to it in a second. At the end of the day, there are admirable things about The Mummy. I can't in good faith recommend it, but if you're sitting home one night, it's on streaming, definitely give it a watch. There's worse things. There's some good ideas in The Mummy, but ultimately, it's not as strong as the sum of its parts. Okay, so this is our unhinged review from Amazon Prime. This was reviewed in the United States on January 14th, 2023. So obviously this is from this year. Somebody waited, 8 years, whatever it was to... Actually, not even 8 years. Oh my God, it's 6 years. Oof, I can't count. The pandemic really cooked my brain. So here's the review. And it's from Lauren Sarver in New Orleans. T. Cruz obviously doesn't give a crap anymore. And Russell Crowe also. Total rubbish. Absolute garbage. I'm not even going to write out an extended review. It's not even worth it, bro. 1 star. You know what, Lauren Sarver? Controversial opinion? You're not wrong. You're not wrong. I hope that you've been enjoying this season as much as we have. I've been having a lot of fun doing some different movies. Don't worry, even though this is horror adjacent, we will get back to the horror movies as we get closer to Halloween. Ooh, spooky. I know that's the stuff that you love, but we needed to explore these films. A lot of them fit together. Cobra and Last Action Hero fit together. They're like two of a piece. The Mummy and John Carter, they fit together. They're of a piece. They're studios trying to take big swings at creating a new franchise, and ultimately they fall kind of short. That's really what the theme of all of this is. The Dark Universe failed mainly because they didn't have an idea. They just had a concept. It was more of a marketing concept than an actual story. And that's where good films begin. If you don't have a solid script, if you don't have a good story, you can't build a universe. And unfortunately, The Mummy just becomes a cultural oddity of a time where a lot of film studios were willing to spend a lot of money to promote movies that ultimately didn't have any roots in anything. It was almost like the whole thing with The Mummy, like it was a Ponzi scheme. It was a hustle. It was something of that nature. Oh, I didn't forget one of my favorite facts of this. Another thing that they were developing at a certain point with this was Ryan Gosling has been desperately trying to get a Wolfman movie. And we talked about earlier, we talked about like the Dwayne Johnson Wolfman movie, which I think was just like somebody in marketing was like, who would be a good werewolf? Dwayne Johnson. We have his phone number? Yeah, give him a call. See what he says. There was the other adaptation that had been done, with Anthony Hopkins. There was that Wolfman, which was only a couple of years ago, it feels like. Actively right now, that's kind of one of those things that Ryan Gosling has been trying to get made, is his version of the Wolfman. He wants to do something new with it. He was talking about it might be a modern take. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. It won't be long, though, because now with Universal making the commitment to the dark, and that's the legacy. That's the lasting thing, is that if they do go forward and they call this land an epic universe at the theme park, if they call it Dark Universe, then all of this would have been totally worth it. Because then you have a payoff. You've got something. Kids will go, hey, let's go to the dark universe and go see Dracula or whatever it is. And that was another one. Sorry that I keep remembering the stuff at the end, but there was Dracula Untold. And that was supposed to be another beginning of... Originally, Dracula Untold was going to be connected to The Mummy. And if you watch Dracula Untold, there's a spoiler stinger at the end. It's not a spoiler stinger, but a stinger. There's a stinger at the end that like sets up more Dracula movies, or that there's a larger universe. So one thing is for certain, besides death and taxes, every couple of years, Universal will get some kind of wild thoughts in their brain, much like Rihanna, and they will figure out a way to try and bring back the Universal monsters. And no matter how hard they try, some things just don't seem to stick. Except for, again, we talked about that excellent Invisible Man. Some of the stuff works. You have to establish characters. You have to establish new creatures, new monsters, and then slowly, maybe you build towards it. You know, before we got House of Frankenstein or House of Dracula, we had the Wolfman Met Frankenstein. Start small. You know, don't worry about the dark universe. Maybe Tom Cruise, I don't know. It's just terrible. There's a lot worse things in this world than me complaining about a failed monster franchise at Universal. But you can bet your sweet ass I'll be first in line with my tickets to go down to that theme park and see all the wonderful things that they've built. Because at the end of the day, The Mummy might not have been a really good idea for a movie, but it was a great idea for a theme park ride. I hope you guys have been enjoying this season. Don't forget to follow me on social media. I'm always there. It's at Jerry Horror everywhere. Hit me up on Letterboxd. Hit me up on Instagram, Twitter. I'm always reviewing movies, talking about stuff, weighing in my thoughts on the current cinematic trends and whatnot. Hey, don't forget, leave a review over on iTunes. And if you like learning as much as I learn from you, let's make that a good thing. Let's make that happen. Because if you leave me a piece of trivia, maybe you've got something that I can read on air. You know, maybe you've got a suggestion. Maybe you've got a fun fact that'll completely stump me. Look, whatever it is, let's play this game like Saw. I mean, that worked. They made 10 of those. 10 of them? Yeah, they made 10 of them. Oh, God. That Saw franchise has just gone on too long. Speaking of going on too long, I've overstayed my welcome at this point, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Jerry Horror. This is The Offering. Mostly horror, always genre. You've been listening to The Offering with Jerry Horror. I'm very sorry. Produced by Pete Bune. If you have a question or a story you want to share with me, we'd love to hear from you. You can email me at jerryhorror@gmail.com or hit us up at Twitter @jerryhorror or on Instagram @jerryhorror. You getting the picture? Subscribe to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever fine podcasts are provided for you and your family. I want you to enjoy. Just join us next time for another offering.
This has been a Sick Boy Wolfgang production. Thank you for listening.